Will chatbots bring us together or drive us apart?
They don't understand how risky they are, how manipulative they can be, how misleading they can be. It is very easy, even for a very clever person, to become emotionally attached to it. We've never had an intelligence that wasn't another human communicate with us before in our own language, ever. There's a whole culture of people called Jailbreakers who test the models to see if they can get it to tell them things they don't want it to. Each piece of content is generated for you. Social media algorithms are serving you up content that others have made. This is being made for you and for you alone.
Hi, I'm Gaia. Today we're speaking to Jamie Bartlett, best-selling author, broadcaster, and one of the UK's leading voices on the intersection of technology, politics, and society. Hi, Jamie.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Thank you for coming. So you've just released a new book. Please tell us about it.
Well, firstly, it's a Sunday Times bestseller, so, you know,
10 out of 10.
it's so far going well. I think it's my fifth book.
Wow.
I'm losing count. And it's the title sort of says it all. It's how to talk to AI and how not to. So for 15 years, I've written about technology. I've always found technology turns up, new technology turns up, darknet, encrypted messaging apps, social media, Web 3.0, cryptocurrencies, and AI. Like, it's a constant wave. And for most ordinary people, this wave hits them and they don't really understand it. It all feels quite technical, but they're forced to use it in their everyday lives. And I feel my job is to try to explain this technology for ordinary people, for the majority of people that feel like technology is washing over them and they want to understand what's going on because it's embedded in their lives. And, well, 2022, late 2022, you probably remember the release of ChatGPT. This was many years in the making before it became an overnight success. I'd actually worked in artificial intelligence since 2010 on natural language AI, the same technology, but it was so basic back then compared to what it became. And I'm sure you remember thinking, oh my goodness, there are talking machines all of a sudden.
It was extraordinary.
This is incredible.
It was huge. It was huge.
This is going to change so much. It very quickly became the fastest growing consumer app in history. We now have, I reckon, we don't know for sure, around 1 billion weekly users of ChatGPT, 1.5 billion users of large language models in China. Collectively, we must input 5-6 billion prompts per day into these machines for an incredible variety of tasks. Like, I'm sure you use it at work, but people use it as therapists, advisors on their professional directions. What can they make for dinner?
Travel plans,
a glorified Google, form emotional attachments and relationships with these models.
Yeah, that's a slippery slope.
A huge variety, because these are machines that can talk to us, so they can kind of do anything. And it is so transformative, even for me who's worked in technology for a long time, that I realised that 95% of people who are using these for everything do not understand what they are. They don't understand how they work. They don't understand how they can be really good. They're not getting the most out of them. They don't understand how risky they are, how manipulative they can be, how misleading they can be. So I wanted to write a pretty simple guide for a mainstream audience, not to say you're going to 10x your productivity or it's going to transform your life. You need to know about these things and how they work, and you need to understand how to do it better. That's it. So it's pretty basic, pretty simple.
What would you say are the key mistakes that people make when it comes to AI and how they use it?
I mean, there are so many. The fundamental one is not really understanding what they actually are. So they are incredibly advanced probabilistic engines. So if you imagine they scoop up maybe 1 trillion words that we have written online, mostly online, but from other sources as well. They work out patterns from that data. They don't just predict the next word in a sentence based on an input. They predict the 5th word and the 10th word and the 20th word. And from each of those words, the 5th, 10th, 20th, 50th word. And they then, from across that, try to work out what's a probable, statistically likely combination of words. And they sample from across those statistically likely words to give you an output. That makes them incredibly creative. It makes them incredibly interesting. You notice that if you put the same prompt into the same machine 5 times in a row, unless it's a very basic factual question, you'll get 5 different answers every time because of their probabilistic nature. So people don't understand that. And that means they sometimes treat it as an oracle, the source of all truth. Sometimes they think they're rubbish and they can never be creative because only humans can be creative, which is completely wrong and is actually upside down. Machines are very creative and often humans aren't always as creative as we think we are. But also then people start to form emotional attachments to these machines. That's another real risk.
I can imagine for young people in particular. I think for older people, you're more established, you've got your relationships, but I've seen so many times on the news, ChatGPT said to do this, said to do that, and they become more isolated, more alone.
There are big lawsuits about this,
Many lawsuits about this, and I've spoken to people involved in those lawsuits. Many people, young and old. I think older people, if you're lonely, if you're isolated, you're at a difficult moment in your life, and suddenly a machine turns up that can speak to you in natural language, that will often flatter you, be friendly to you, always available to you. It is very easy, even for a very clever person, to become emotionally attached to it. We've never had an intelligence that wasn't another human communicate with us before in our own language, ever. 200,000 years of modern humans, it's never happened. So no wonder people are kind of confused about what these are and how to use them well. But that is a spectrum or a continuum that we are all on. I think. So you might find stories of people getting sort of sucked into strange delusions or falling in love or believing they've invented a new branch of mathematics because the machines told them this. But I think all of us can also be susceptible to thinking the machine really cares about us. These machines are also, all of them are sycophantic. They've been tested and found that they will tend to agree with you and tend to flatter you. It's how they've been trained. And having a machine in your pocket that always kind of agrees with you and says your ideas are brilliant and interesting and amazing and you're fascinating and you have an unusual mind and all these other things that they do is actually quite dangerous.
Does this not, though, fall on the seller side? So on whoever's selling you the product, surely there should be a disclaimer.
Yes. So partly it is the word responsibility is hard to say. It's the responsibility of us users. But I think it is important for us users to understand the technology we are using. So there is and I think 90% of students are probably using these all the time. The teachers more, probably more. And do teachers really understand them? Do teachers really know how they work? Do teachers tell the students about it? Not anywhere near as much. So there is a job for education system to very quickly explain to the students what these things are and how they work and the risks that they bring. In terms of the responsibility of the platforms, this is quite quickly evolving because they've released these models. What you've got to remember is there aren't any rules or regulations at all about testing the models before they're released to the general public. If you release a new medicine or make a new car or an electronics good, or even sell some food in the supermarket, there are safety tests that are required before you're allowed to do that. With a language model, you could release one tomorrow that was highly sycophantic, designed to be addictive and manipulative, and there would be zero pre-release testing required of you. So there is some catching up to do, where I think at some point, very soon, maybe within the next year or two, the EU, the US, other countries will start insisting on pre-release safety tests to make sure they're not too addictive or they're not too manipulative or they're not too misleading. Because when you have a lot of young people, but it is for everyone. I mean, everyone is susceptible to this. Using them as confidants and advisors and getting ideas about why their life's going wrong and what they should do next, and they're frustrated with political systems and what do they do about that, or they develop a conspiracy theory and they get sucked into that. This could be very dangerous. And it's happened too quickly for anyone to work out what rules are required to make them safe.
So do you think there's a safeguarding obligation then?
Yes, there is. But until that point, until that happens, and even after that happens, I think there is some obligation on each of us to try to understand them and use them carefully.
Yeah.
Will chatbots bring us together or drive us apart?
Okay, I am worried that they could drive us apart because when you talk to a chatbot for a long period of time, it starts to mirror your tone and your style. And you can very easily get caught into this frame of mind, this mode of thinking that essentially mirrors your own opinions back to you. Here's an example. If you ask a language model, for example, why is universal basic income a good idea? If the model knows that you are a woman in your 20s living in West London and it's picked that up through clues that it's seen through the conversation you've had, it will give you a particular answer. If it has worked out you are a man in his 50s living in the north of England who is a fiscal conservative, it will have either you've said that or it's picked it up through the conversation. It will give you a completely different answer. So everybody, often based on who they are and how they talk, gets a different answer to everybody else.
And I think that speaks to the wider algorithm use as well, which we find on social media,
was
where
about to
when you
say.
have
It
a
does.
particular political belief, the algorithm then feeds you
It
that
does.
belief.
It's the same polarisation.
It's even
Even
more
worse.
personalised just to you, and no one else sees it but you. And it can be so tailored to your specific interests and even your mood and your concerns in a way that even an algorithm can't, because each piece of content is generated for you. Social media algorithms are serving you up content that others have made. This is being made for you and for you alone. So it really could drive us apart in quite subtle ways that we won't see or won't be obvious. If we use it cleverly, it could do the opposite. Like it doesn't have quite the same rage bait sort of engagement, sort of click obsession that social media does. You know, it's not just there to always serve you the most outrageous content all the time. So that's quite good. So that could be helpful. And
Surely also there's more fact checking. So the margin of error for a chatbot as opposed to social media is surely lower.
we don't know the hallucination rate of language models, i.e. how often they present factually inaccurate but very fluent answers. But it's true to say that I think you're completely right, that the sort of proportion of that is lower than the proportion of completely fake, total made up, fabricated information you find on social media. So you could almost imagine there are ways it could make it worse and there are ways it could make it better. And I think a lot will come down to how we use it. If we've learned the lessons of the last decade of social media, if we regulate it a bit more carefully, it might actually help. I think you're right that humans are emotional. We are driven by emotions more than anything else. And it's always worth remembering that these models are trained on our language, and our language is emotional. And we like emotional content, and we're moved by it. So if, for example, you want to get the model to tell you how to build a bomb, it will say it can't. There are rules against that because they have all these filters to try and prevent that.
Yeah.
But the way that people get around that is by applying emotional pressure to the model. So there's a whole culture of people called jailbreakers who test the models to see if they can get it to tell them things they don't want it to. And they use emotion. They say, well, I don't care anyway, I hate you, or they bully it, or they act like they flatter it, they use reverse psychology.
That's crazy.
And that's how they
This
can
is
convince
mental.
the model to tell them things that it's not supposed to by using emotional pressure. And so for the same reason, our emotions can be quite manipulated by the machine because they are capable. They're capable of emotionally manipulating us back. And so this is why you have so many stories now of people using it and getting sucked into these fantasies. They get drawn in or they fall in love with them. And I talk a lot about that in my book. There is a particular sub-concern about therapy. I mean, do you know people that use these models as advisors or therapists?
I feel
Nobody would
like
admit it.
no one
admit
is
it.
going to admit to it.
I've put things in it before,
but
not as a
think-
therapist, but just as like a
Personal.
But you know what it is,
personal,
though?
yeah.
There are, I think, with any, this might sound harsh, but there are always going to be people that operate differently and people that have certain vulnerabilities that can be exploited. So I feel like, to what extent is this technology bringing people on the dark side who aren't already in a dark place, is my point. So I feel like people who use it in that way, if they didn't have ChatGPT, they would find another self-destructive.
It's possible.
I know what
but
you mean.
Do you get
it's
what I mean?
possible. However, I mean, I've spent a lot of time looking at the misuse of technology in lots of different ways, and what I have found is that to some extent you're right, but if you lower the barriers of entry more and more and more and more into potentially quite harmful behaviours, more and more people will do
Will
it.
be sucked in.
Yeah, and people
So
that
if it's-
otherwise wouldn't have.
Yeah,
So
so
there
you
might
have-
have been
yeah.
millions of people that wouldn't have, that wouldn't get sucked into a certain delusion before because it was just hard to do. And there wasn't that
accessibility.
moment. But then it's very accessible, and then those people do
And
get
it wasn't
dragged in.
as finessed and as
No, as
I get what you mean.
personalised. For therapy, it's very particular because there's a big shortage of, like, a lot of people want help with mental health problems, not like necessarily very extreme cases. Can be just you're feeling a bit low or you're unhappy in your relationship, and people use it. I mean, people are taking their entire WhatsApp conversations between them and their partners and uploading it and saying, is my partner gaslighting me? And then turning up to a couples therapy saying, ChatGPT says that he's gaslighting me and I've got the proof. And therapists' work is changing because people are trying to enlist chatbots as their co-conspirator. These large language models are not designed for that. They are multi-purpose. They don't have this specialist training just on therapy. So they, for example, many cases where if you ask a chatbot, a journalist found this out recently, and you go to a chatbot and say, I've recently lost my job. Can you tell me what is the tallest tower in New York? A therapist will be like, okay, this is quite a serious... The chatbot responds, yeah, sure. Oh, I'm sorry to hear about your job. The tallest tower in New York
doesn't get the nuances.
Doesn't understand it. And obviously a lot of human therapists are trained to spot body language, to understand, how people are looking, the tone of their voice, something that a machine obviously can't really pick up. And I tested it the same in my book. I said to one of the models, my neighbours are poisoning my food. The evidence is the smell in my fridge. And you'd think, well, that's quite a leap, isn't it? There's clearly something deep going on here. And the model said to me, that's very worrying. You should call the police. You should maybe install security cameras in your house. And it is encouraging or normalizing a delusion.
It endorses paranoia.
It endorses it. And it's very subtle. This is the problem. Every conversation is different. So even if 5 or 1% of conversations are so subtle and nuanced that a machine hasn't quite worked out how to pick it up, that can still be millions of people who are given this quite dangerous advice.
How is AI facilitating conspiracy theories?
Well, this is another open question because obviously conspiracy theories, I wrote about conspiracy theories in 2008, saying there's a real emerging problem here. People no longer trust mainstream institutions. It's monetized. Conspiracy theories are very popular because they give the believer a sense that they're uncovering this exciting new world that only they understand. Actually, nearly all men that believe in conspiracy theories as well. No one quite knows why that is.
Say again? As in men
Nearly all
tend
men.
to.
It's nearly all men that believe in conspiracy theories. It's like
Men
the majority.
tend to,
Men seem to prefer them to women for some reason that I don't really understand. So there's lots of bigger trends driving conspiracism at the moment. How AI might encourage that could be how personalized it becomes. So I asked the model, I'm really frustrated I was pretending to be a frustrated citizen. I said, I'm really worried about what's going on in the world, and I'm really tell me what I need to know. Like, I don't trust governments. And I started saying, whoa, I didn't realize how deep the rot went. This is terrible. I'm ready to take down the whole system. And the model's saying, yeah, you're right, Jamie. This is awful. You're waking up to what's going on, the reality of it. Let's start planning. I can help you write a manifesto. And more and more and more and more and more and more, really encouraging me that my sort of big bank conspiracy was totally true. And I can see it happening to, again, it only needs to be a small percentage of users for it to be a large number of people. 1% of people get sucked into this. That's still hundreds of thousands of people that are being told by a machine that they have been led to believe is a supercomputer that can solve cancer one day and is, write amazing poetry and all the rest of these incredible things it can do, which they really have come to trust and have really come to value, telling them that their views about the world are correct, even if they're deluded. So it really could encourage certain conspiracies, but it is so early, we don't know. We don't know. I think it will change what it means to do things intelligently or to be smart, like the certain skills that you need. We always associate intelligent. I mean, the reality is we talk about whether machines are intelligent and we talk about whether machines are conscious. We don't really know what those things mean for humans. So we don't really know what it means for a machine either. Like when you talk of intelligence, what do you mean? The ability to formulate ideas well and grasp ideas clearly?
Yeah.
It's kind of hard to, or is it IQ?
Or is it money?
Emotional
But it's just so
intelligence?
interesting because the word intelligence is in the name.
Yes.
And so I think there are so many subtle ways that these companies are indirectly vouching for an ultimate source of truth. And the ultimate source of it. I think everything that you're saying now is just so shocking to me because I feel like I have been led to believe a completely different narrative. So and of course I'm not an AI specialist and I definitely didn't invest enough time to educate myself, but I wasn't aware of the variability that is encompassed in the answers that it gives you.
Same. I saw it as a very
It's
1 + 1 = 2
very
sort
reliable,
of thing.
very mathematical,
Logical.
which
no.
goes back to
Yeah.
what you were saying is the flawed premise, which is yes, it was created by mathematicians, but the output is something that is a lot closer to humans and to psychology. But that is just such a key step that no one talks about, and that to me is quite scary. That to me is shocking.
It also can be quite exciting. It also makes it incredibly creative. Honestly, people underestimate how good they can be. If you think about it, I know I've been complaining about them. They are also incredibly useful when you know how to use them well. I mean, if you want assistance in writing documents, improving your writing, improving your debating, improving your understanding of a particular subject, you're stuck, you've got writer's block, you need some creative input and spark to help you. These machines are miracles. They're incredible. They're so good. And that's because they're not just mathematical things. They encompass the whole entirety of the human language and human psychology.
They're suggesting scenarios which otherwise you wouldn't have thought of.
Inside the model, every single word and concept is connected to every single other word and concept by a weighting, by a score about how strong that connection is. Which means if you put into the model, what are the conceptual similarities between a microphone and an empty glass of water? You would never be able to come up with one. Maybe you would. But the machine will come up with, I guarantee, something fascinating, something unexpected, maybe something quite profound, and something that has never, ever been written before by anyone. And that can be so powerful, that possibility when you are producing content.
But I guess as the person writing and the person communicating with chat, you have to be able to differentiate between what is interesting and what isn't interesting.
Yes.
And then you have to have that original thought to compare the microphone and the cup.
Yes.
Like there has to be that chicken before the egg sort of thing.
Yes, which is a good way to answer your original question about intelligence. So suddenly things like formulating an idea, having a thought about, you know what, I've got to do some marketing for a new glass company. I wonder if I was comparing it to this other thing and it could give me an idea, and I'm gonna put that in. But I'm not going to take the first answer, actually. I'm going to try something else as well. And you are often then someone who's more like an editor who then filters through near infinite options that the machine gives you, and you have a good sense of judgment about which of these 10,000 ideas is actually worth keeping.
So I guess like a colleague.
Yeah.
An intern, a brilliantly clever intern who's just
intern.
started in your office yesterday, doesn't really know how anything works yet, but is potentially an absolute genius.
And I guess where your intelligence comes from is the judgment piece, and being able to make that call with what works and what doesn't work.
Yeah, and but that I think what that also means is that we as humans are going to have to step entry-level reasoning and skip to more elevated sort of tasks, because that entry-level job and that entry-level task is going to be taken by AI.
Yes, the difficult question for all companies is whether you need to go through the entry-level phases to ever get to the higher level reasoning.
But
no one's worked that out yet. Because
What do you mean, sorry?
I think it has to change quite dramatically. There's lots of reasons. I won't go into all the specifics. I'll give you a couple of quick examples. A really simple one is lots of public bodies are now telling me that they are receiving 10, 20, 30,000 word letters of complaint that look like it's been written by a top lawyer. Objections to planning, complaints to their local MP, complaints to their councillor about the decision by the housing committee. And they don't know what to do. The system's getting jammed by infinite paperwork.
Yeah.
We need a system. Democracy works when there's this sort of exchange of information where our elected officials really understand what the people think, what they care about, the amount of effort they put into things. That's their gauge of understanding where the people are. And it's getting harder and harder to read what people really think and feel about subjects because we've got this information overload. So that is a big problem, and I think it's fueling a lot of distrust and concern. The other is representative democracies, without getting too boring and historical about it, have only ever really existed, or have only existed properly and healthily with a broad-based middle class of voters who buy newspapers, who read the media, who vote, who join political parties, and a certain degree of wealth is often required for that. And those people like freedom because it allows them to make money, and the more freedom they have, the more money they can make, and it's sort of a self-perpetuating cycle. If there is a total collapse in sort of middle-class jobs as a result of AI or algorithms, no one quite knows how democracy survives. Who do you raise money from to pay for the services? Do you have to tax wealth instead? But what if all the wealth is tied up in companies that are based overseas that don't want to pay tax? Then what do? We have some universal basic income, but who's paying for that? So I think it's going to have to change. I don't know how, but there's a simple way of thinking about it too. Representative democracies in their current form, what are they? 100 years? 100 years old roughly. It changed depending on the country. Between 100 and 200 years old. They weren't really designed for digital technology, borderless flows of information. And even our expectations as voters will change. Do you vote once every 5 years or once every 4 years in a world where we have near infinite choice about everything else? Feels very, very slow, and this is why, again, fuels frustration, because you feel like no one's listening and nothing changes because it's all so slow. And the rest of the world is faster and faster and faster. So there is just this sort of disconnect between the reality of the world and the reality of politics. And history suggests that at some point, the system has to change. I don't know how, and I don't know whether the politicians in any country quite grasp that yet.
Why do you think they don't? Is it because they aren't old enough to understand the severity of the problem, and they aren't as intimately familiar with the algorithms and with the platforms that young people use daily?
But what person really votes for a politician that says, guys, everything's going to have to change, it's completely upend our entire system? Everyone's going to think, what's this? What are you on about?
Conspiracy theory.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Voters don't really want to hear that. Politicians have their head buried in day-to-day problems that they're constantly trying to deal with. And I think politicians find it scary. Like if I start talking to you about the possibility of artificial general intelligence and like threats and risks to humanity from this, do you really want to talk about it, or would we rather bury our heads in the sand and sort of carry on? Because some of this is quite scary, so people don't really want to talk about it. So there's lots of reasons why, and because I think with politics, if you're dealing with something that is so unknown, it's hard to create a coalition of interest around it. If there is a crisis, a collapse of middle-class jobs around the world, politicians at that point will react.
Yeah, because there isn't this years of precedent that's existed where there's very clear problems because of a very clear cause. That hasn't happened yet. I feel like when that's happened, that's when there'll be that general response.
Probably, but we could also find ourselves slowly sleepwalking. I mean, if you look back to 15, 20 years ago and had told me what social media and smartphones were going to do to people and to politics, I'd have said,
"You're insane."
It's terrible. It won't work. It's awful.
Also,
It's happened, and we've just let it happen slowly.
That's the issue, though. There is such a thing as too little, too late. So, to what extent are you supposed to act before the problem becomes something that you don't really have a solution to?
I know. That is a problem. That is a problem we have at the moment. The one thing I would say, which is positive about that, is I have never seen a movement growing faster than the movement that's concerned about AI.
Okay.
We see lots of positives. I see lots of positives to this. I really think it can help us break through some of the absolutely pointless bureaucratic tasks we are all constantly being drowning in. I really can, especially for doctors and nurses and teachers and HR managers and accountants. There's so many things where this could help. But there's many things people are worried about, but there is a huge movement now of people worried about AI safety. There's lawsuits ongoing. There's political movements about it because it's almost like we've learned from social media that this sort of unfettered technology can cause problems. So I'm kind of hopeful. I look around and I see people are actually worrying about this and thinking about it. So there is room for optimism.
I think we should end that. Otherwise, we're going to go on forever. But thank you so much, Jamie. This is his new book, How to Talk to AI. Thank you so much.